So, hello, welcome to the Football Reporters. It's transfer deadline day. There's about 11 minutes to go before the winter deadline, and it's been a fairly busy day. We've had our London guy, James Ollie's been covering lots of different outcomes and possible transfers in London. We've had Rob Dawson doing not a lot in Manchester today because not a lot's happening in Manchester today. And Beth Lindop on Merseyside. I guess we'll start with you, Beth, because Liverpool have actually made a signing or are about to make a signing, but he won't arrive until the summer. Jeremy Jacquet from Rennes. Chelsea were interested. So what's happened? Why have Liverpool signed him and why they're not having him at Anfield until the summer?
Yeah, well, I think he's a name that has been mentioned for a few months now in conversations around Liverpool, and he's obviously, you mentioned Chelsea have been very interested in him. It seemed earlier in the window that Chelsea were potentially looking to get a deal done this month, which obviously something that Rennes weren't prepared to sanction, and that's why he's obviously staying in France until the summer. But yeah, I think Liverpool have really wanted to kind of future-proof the back line. That has been sort of their MO the past couple of transfer windows, really. They were interested in Lenny Yoro before he went to Manchester United. They were interested in Dean Howson before he ended up at Real Madrid. And then they end up signing Giovanni Leone from Parma last summer, who is still viewed as a top young player. But he has obviously been out for most of the season with an ACL injury. So with Ibrahima Konate being out of contract in the summer, as things stand, he's going to leave as a free agent. I don't think the club have quite given up hope of signing him to a new deal, but as things stand, he's leaving. Andy Robertson's leaving as well. So they do need defensive reinforcements. Virgil van Dijk obviously out of contract in 2027, so I think that they're trying to bolster as much the back line as they can. And I think they're going to have quite a busy summer. I think they've still got a fair bit to do, despite the money that they spent last summer. So I think the fact that they could get a deal wrapped up now, it is a real positive. But the negative is that he obviously isn't joining until the summer. And I think Liverpool did really need defensive reinforcements this month, which, unless something miraculous happens in the next 9 minutes, I don't anticipate happening. So yeah, it's maybe a little bit of a risk from the club to not bring someone in now. But in terms of the future, then Jeremy Jacquet certainly looks like a top young player who's going to come in and join the team.
Beth, an obvious question here, but Jacquet is costing a basic £55 million. He's 20 years old. He's largely unproven. He's unproven in the Premier League, but they could have got Mark Guehi for probably half that in August, September. So does that make the Gay situation look even worse now? The fact that obviously he's got to Man City as well. So the fact that they could have brought Gay for less than Jacquet 6 months ago.
Yeah, I think basically Liverpool messed up in the summer with Gay. I don't think that there's any beating around the bush with that. And I mean, Liverpool's hierarchy would say that wasn't their fault, because they did ultimately get a deal agreed with Palace. Palace accepted it, and they only pulled the plug, at the 11th hour, by which point it was too late for Liverpool to do anything about it. But Liverpool should have moved earlier with that one, I think. They obviously sensed there was a market opportunity there last summer. That's a phrase that they like to use a lot, with Mark Gay being out of contract in 2026. They obviously felt they weren't prepared to go above a certain price, rightly or wrongly. And they paid the price for that, and they've dropped a number of points this season because of defensive errors, because the back line hasn't been strong enough. And I think had they maybe moved a little bit earlier or been a bit more aggressive in their pursuit of Gay last summer, then that could have been a different story. So I think this month, obviously, we might get on to talking a bit more about Gay to City a bit later on, maybe, but I think Liverpool just felt like a deal couldn't be done for the right finances. And I think, the package that Mark Gay has commanded, even though it was only a £20 million transfer fee, I think Liverpool felt like the wages that he was possibly going to be demanding at this point weren't within the framework that they have of the wage structure. So you would imagine that Jeremy Jacquet, as a young player, will be coming in and will be on a considerably lower wage than the wage Gay would have asked for. So yeah, I think there was an error last summer massively, but Liverpool obviously now looking to rectify that by planning for the long term, and in both Leone and Jacquet, it looks like they've got two top young players, albeit players improving in the Premier League.
James, just in terms of London clubs, have Crystal Palace become the new Tottenham under Daniel Levy, where they're either getting deals done or deals are collapsing? Because obviously the Guehi situation went to the last minute on the summer deadline and he stayed. And today, Jean-Philippe Mateta, his move to Milan has collapsed. It seems for a failed medical. They've got Strand Larsen that may be coming, may not be coming. So I know Palace is not your kind of day-to-day club, but any sense of what's going on there?
Well, yeah, look, I mean, when the dust settles and all this, I think there's going to be some questions for Steve Parish and the decision makers at Palace to answer. You know, I mean, we talking about Gahey there. I mean, I understand Liverpool obviously probably feel they botched that deal right at the end of last summer, but I mean, Palace were turning down 55, 60 million pound bids for him a year earlier. And the issue there was that Palace always felt somehow that they were going to be able to convince Mark Gahey to sign a new contract. And so they weren't overly concerned that his deal was running down. But among my contacts is someone quite close to Mark Gahey, and they were absolutely adamant all the way along. I mean, from like 3 years out of the end of his deal, he's not signing a new deal. There's no way he will sign a new contract. And they were absolutely consistent in that position all the way through. And because Steve Parish and the others at Palace felt differently, that they felt, you know, maybe if they win the FA Cup and they might convince him that he could stay, or, you know, they achieve something miraculous through the league position that might convince him that, you know, his future lies at Selhurst Park, that they could talk him into a new deal. But all the time his value diminished, and they played this game, this brinkmanship game, which has ended up them losing, you know, their captain sort of, you know, for a fraction of what they could have sold him for. And we're maybe seeing a similar situation now with Mateta. And obviously there's still time. It's possible that they might be able to work something out, but it feels as though they've left this so late that they're now having an asset that's depreciating. Again, someone else who's not going to sign a contract, whose deal will obviously run down another 6 months if they can't find an agreement now, and it ends up being the summer. And you do sort of think, well, their approach to this has not really been ideal. I mean, you know, obviously they got good money for Eze, they got reasonable money for Elise as well. So it's not all a disaster. But when you've got the manager leaving at the end of the season, who's become incredibly frustrated by that decision-making process and what he sees as a lack of support, it does feed into that wider picture of, you know, that I think they've got to ask themselves some very difficult questions at the end of this window. I mean, it looks like now they're trying to do Dwight McNeil very, very late in the window as well. Suggestion that they've agreed a £20 million fee with Everton for McNeil, but you know, it's 6:57 now. I mean, they've got obviously time to get the paperwork in. We talk about, are we going to get into deal sheets and the extra time they've got to submit all of that paperwork? But the point is, this isn't a done deal. If they were going to do this, why have they waited so late? You know, this brinkmanship can, on occasion, get you a bargain, but more often than not, it gets you into trouble.
I mean, talking about brinksmanship, you were at Mikel Arteta's press conference today, and it's now 6:58, 2 minutes to go. He did tease the prospect of a potential bit of business. So you're not going to be dashing off in the next 120 seconds, are you, to unveil a new Arsenal signing?
These press conferences on deadline day are always interesting, aren't they? I'm sure we've all covered them at one time or another. Because it puts the manager in a very difficult position that, you know, the club don't want any journalists inside the training ground on deadline day. They just don't want us anywhere near them. And worse than that, they don't want a manager having to speak publicly on, you know, on a very time-sensitive situation as deadline day clearly is. And I think we all went there today thinking, well, he's just going to. The club had sort of privately had already knocked down the Sandro Tonali stuff this morning. Obviously, Newcastle were very strong in knocking that down as well. So I think we all kind of went there thinking, well, he's just going to say, well, look, you know, yes, if anything comes up last minute, but we spent 250 million on 8 new players in the summer. We've got, everyone talks about the deep squad. We'll go with what we've got, type thing. But he didn't do that. And for Arteta, who's quite a conservative manager, I would say, in press conferences, certainly in imparting information, he doesn't tend to drop things in by accident. He doesn't reveal stuff, you know, through the ebullience of his character, shall we say. It was quite noted, I think, from us in the room that he seemed to sort of say, well, look, you know, we are actively looking at it. And I actually said to him, you know, would you be relaxed about the situation if you don't get anyone in? Because as we're speaking, it's 5 hours until the window closes. And he said, no, I wouldn't be relaxed. We're on it. And we all kind of, you know, he left the room and we all sort of thought, well, they're clearly, they've got something in mind here. But in the intervening 5 hours, I've been trying to find out what that is. Leon Goretzka at Bayern is the only one that has sort of pinged back to me with more than one person suggesting it's possible, but again, they're leaving it very, very late.
Yeah, the clock is ticking. I think it's 7 o'clock. We're just hit 7 o'clock now, so it's almost like the bells for New Year's Eve, isn't it? Finally, the window is shut for another 6 months. And Rob, I know you've had a really kind of fraught day in Manchester today, keeping track on Calvin Phillips' emergence as a deal. Calvin Phillips, he still plays for Man City, by the way, but now he's off to Sheffield United on loan. Just tell us about his contract, Rob, because this isn't a role alone with an option to buy an obligation, because he seems to have the longest contract in history, or longest contract outside of Chelsea, shall we say.
Yeah, well, I must admit that when I checked today how long his contract is, I surprised myself, because he's under contract at City until 2028, which means that he's got more than 2 years left. The deal with Sheffield United is just a straight loan until the end of the season, which means there's no obligation or option to make that permanent in the summer, and so he will be back at City in the summer, sat on a contract which is going to run for another 2 years, which is incredible, really, given that he's just not featured at all for City, or barely, since he joined from Leeds in, I think it was 2022, which was the same summer that Erling Haaland arrived. I mean, I think it's one of those deals that's a little bit of a warning, really, for everyone. That I think at the time, Calvin Phillips was one of the best midfielders in the Premier League. He played regularly for England. He played in a Euros final for England at the delayed Euro 2020. So the final would have been 2021. So it was right at the kind of the top when he joined City, and everyone just kind of assumed that he would fit in really well. He would be an understudy initially to Rodri and then kind of work his way in. And it's just, for whatever reason, it's not really worked out like that. And Pep Guardiola, I think very early on, realised that perhaps he wasn't a fit for, or couldn't do the things that he wanted him to do. Was left out of the team really regularly, even in that first season, in a treble-winning season. He barely played. I think he made 20 appearances. 17 or 18 of them were off the bench. And then since then, he's had loan spells at West Ham that's not worked out. At Ipswich in the Premier League, again, didn't really work out. He's had injuries which have affected him. Now he's having to drop down a league into the Championship. Play for Sheffield United, who aren't even really pushing for promotion. I think they're 17th, so there's an outside chance they could get in the playoffs, but nothing more than that, really. And essentially, he's going there just to try and get his career back on track, because he's 30 years old, and really he's wasted the last 3 years. So we can only hope that he goes to Sheffield United, plays some games, he comes back to City in the summer, and then can sort something else out, because I don't think he's got any kind of future at City. I would doubt now whether he's got any kind of future in the Premier League. He just needs to get somewhere and play games and hope to rebuild some of his confidence, because it's a shame what's happened to him.
Just before we kind of revert to a kind of wrap of the window, I just want to go back to what you're talking there about Sandro Tonali, James. I mean, for fans that are watching and listening, that Tonali rumour is classic transfer window situation, whereby neither club is pushing for a deal, but all of a sudden some mischief making from connected parties makes it sound like Tonali's on the agenda for a transfer. So, I mean, I don't know if there's much more to say about it than that, James, but there are these stories that come out which you just know are driven for malevolent reasons by certain people involved.
Yeah, I mean, and I think what's different with Arsenal now is that they're a bit more susceptible to this, because they've got Andrea Berta working for them, and he's somebody who is not public facing at all. I remember when he joined, we used to, obviously he replaced Edu. We went to Nottingham Forest, and Edu, you could have a dialogue with Edu privately, publicly. He would speak in front of the cameras every now and again. He would come over, to see us in the press room every now and again. I spent some time with him on the tours, pre-season tours in America. And I remember asking someone at Arsenal after Berta arrived, sort of say, well, are we going to have the same kind of relationship? Is he going to sort of, come and press the flesh and sort of, speak to us? And then the reply was no. Just quite simply no. He's not. That is not how he operates. And it's really interesting that, obviously this is, his second window now. That what they kind of, how they operate, they kind of leave him to just go off and have these conversations with people. They know that he obviously spent, 12, 13 years at Atletico Madrid. His contacts book is unrivaled. People tell me how, he works 24/7. He sends messages all through the night for people to wake up to. about updating on deals and potential contracts and even issues that aren't necessarily directly related to Arsenal. He tries to keep everybody in the loop about what the wider market looks like. So it would be easy to imagine that a guy like that who works in the background as he does has had some sort of conversation with somebody in the back room of a stadium somewhere, or a drinks event, or all these kind of places, in a hotel lobby somewhere, that Tonali might not be entirely happy in Newcastle. What's Arsenal's position around him, and that has manifested itself publicly as, Arsenal interested in Tonali. I suspect, from having had conversations around this today, that that's probably the extent of it, which is not to say that maybe in the summer he's a player they might look at, but it's, and as you say, these things are quite often timed to sort of just almost give the market a bit of a collective nudge and sort of say, okay, all right, if Arsenal are going to do something. I mean, going back to Xhaka, actually, I mean, that's, I don't think either Liverpool, and Beth can obviously chime in on this, I don't think Liverpool or Chelsea wanted to do that deal in January. I think from what I was told from the Chelsea side of it, he's a player they wanted to sign in the summer, and we're thinking he is part of our summer transfer strategy. But one of these whispers starts where, actually, there's other clubs who might want to make a move and try and get ahead of the summer window and try and make that deal happen now. So you've got almost a Tonali-like situation there, and the clubs have gone in and gone, actually, we are interested. Let's get this deal done now. And that's why the player is staying where he is and then moving in the summer, as opposed to Rennes obviously allowing him to leave now.
Yeah, I think from Liverpool's perspective, it always felt like if they were going to do any business this month, it would probably be a short term, a sort of a stopgap kind of signing. They were linked a couple of days ago with Luciel Gertrude, who's on loan at Sunderland, and that was the sort of signing that I think we anticipated they might make in January, someone who could come in and do a job maybe across multiple different positions. So yeah, I certainly don't think sort of spending 60 million pound on a centre back was something that we anticipated Liverpool would do this month. Obviously, he won't join until the summer, but yeah, I think that the way that transfers are played out now on social media, and there's just this it's a constant thing, even when the window's not going on. There's constant updates about players' contracts and where players might want to go in the summer. And there obviously have been a lot of talk about Chelsea potentially getting a deal wrapped up for him, and Liverpool perhaps thinking about all of the Gay stuff falling through. They thought we can't really afford to let another target slip through our fingers, and I think that's maybe why they've decided to be a bit proactive and act and get the deal done ahead of the summer.
So Beth, you just mentioned then this kind of constant noise about transfers and transfer speculation. It's like, it's now 7 minutes past 7 on deadline day, and I'm going to ask you all what's going to happen in the summer, right? So let's start with Rob, because obviously Rob, City have done quite a bit of business already this window. So does that mean that they'll be quiet in the summer, and then Man United have done nothing this window? Are they going to be very busy in the summer, depending on who the manager is?
Yeah, I mean, City signing Gay and Semenyo in a January window, I'd suggest that that's probably the best January window that a Premier League club's ever had, because it's unprecedented, really, to get two Premier League proven players at their peak age over the line in January. Obviously, there are different situations that with contracts and release clauses that have allowed them to do that. And Beth mentioned there, but Liverpool talking about market opportunities, and City use that phrase a lot as well, and that's what they've seen in Guéhi and Semenyo. What they would say is that they were two players who they were planning to try and sign in the summer anyway. And what's happened is that they've been allowed the opportunity to try and bring that forward and get them in January. So that's why they've done it. I don't think it means that they're completely done for the summer. I think the suggestion is that they'll look at strengthening the midfield again. I imagine that Bernardo Silva is going to go. He's been quite coy about his future, but he's out of contract and hasn't really given any kind of indication to us and that he's going to stay. I think he's going to end up going back to Portugal probably. It means that City will be looking at central midfielders like Elliot Anderson. Obviously, that has a knock-on effect to Man United, because Man United also want to strengthen their midfield, and they see Elliot Anderson as their, if not their number one target, one of their top targets, along with the likes of Adam Wharton and Carlos Baleba at Brighton. As far as City go, I think after the midfield, they'll also be looking at a right back. That it's been Mateus Nunes who's playing there, who's not really a right back. He's a midfielder. They've got Rico Lewis as well, who can do a job there, but hasn't really been playing well for the last 18 months. So I would expect them to look at a right back. Possibly Livramento at Newcastle is a name that's been mentioned quite a lot. So there will be money spent, I imagine, at City. And then I just mentioned there, I mean, United, I've always said, I mean, I think that we've both written, Mark, through the January window that United have said consistently that they weren't looking to do very much in January, even though there's an obvious need there for a central midfield player. Once Casemiro goes, that's going to free up a lot of wages because he was one of the highest earners. So there's going to be quite a lot of room for manoeuvre in terms of the midfield. As I've just said, though, they are going to find that a lot of their top targets are interesting to other clubs, and it's whether United are able to get those deals, a deal for, say, Elliot Anderson over the line, because they have been quite badly stung by what happened with Semenyo in January. I think that United genuinely thought there was a real chance that they were going to get Semenyo, and it was made very clear to them very early on, before the deal was even done, really, that Semenyo had no interest in joining Man United. It was only City. So that will affect them quite hard. And the worry for them will be that they get down the line with Elliot Anderson and the same thing happens, and then they have to turn their attention to another target. So I think both clubs will be busy in the summer. It's just about who they can get through the door, because it's not always that easy.
Rob, just before I move on to to Beth and James again, Ruben Amorim's gone. Change of manager, it's either going to be Michael Carrick or somebody else.
Yeah.
Does that mean that Marcus Rashford might come back to Man United?
I would find that very odd if that was to happen. I mean, there was a story that was doing the rounds over the weekend that now, if Carrick was to be long-term manager or was to appoint it permanently, that he would look to bring, or would want to bring, Marcus Rashford back. Now, obviously, they played together under Van Gaal. Rashford had some of his best years under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, and obviously Carrick was there on the staff at the time. So you can understand the link. My understanding of that situation, though, was that not only did Rashford burn his bridges with Amorim, which doesn't matter anymore because Amorim is now gone, he also burned his bridges a little bit with the club. And obviously those decision makers are still there. Now, I can understand that if the relationship is still intact, which I'm not sure it is, there are obvious reasons why you would want to bring Rashford back. You know, for all the stick and the grief that he got from Man United fans for what was perceived to be a lack of effort towards the end, he was still Man United's big star in terms of the commercial pull. You know, any kind of sponsors or media companies or broadcasters who wanted to do interviews with Man United players, invariably it was always Rashford. Now, that won't mean very much to fans, but it does mean something to a football club, particularly when that player is someone who's grown up in Manchester, been at the club since they were a kid and come up through the academy. I mean, I would suggest that it's a long shot, because he seems to be very, very settled in Barcelona. His representatives, his family have been saying how well that he's adapted to the lifestyle in Spain. He quite likes Barcelona, the way that he's allowed to live his life. He's not as much under the spotlight as he was at United, which he's quite enjoyed. So I think all the signs point towards him staying at Barcelona. But if Carrick was to get that job, you can understand why there are stories circulating that he may want to go to the hierarchy and say, what's the situation? Because when he was under Carrick and Solskjaer, that for that spell, he was very, very good. So and Carrick will want the best players. So I would be very surprised, but never say never in football.
Beth, a similar one that's impossible to answer right now, but Mo Salah, staying or going this summer?
I wouldn't be surprised if he leaves in the summer. I think, obviously, again, there's an element of uncertainty over the manager long term. You know, he obviously a great win for Liverpool over Newcastle at the weekend, and you know the hierarchy have remained behind Arne Slot even through some really difficult periods. So there is every chance that he stays and fulfills the final year of his contract. But with Xabi Alonso being available, I'm sure there'll be plenty of chat about the manager. So that will impact transfer dealings. And with Mo Salah, it will depend whether, say that if a new manager did come in, would he feel like he would be maybe valued a little bit more than he feels he's been this season? I think the strange thing with Mo Salah is I've watched Liverpool's last two games against Qarabag and Newcastle, and he was poor in both of those games, but he came away with a goal and assist. So that's the kind of player he is. He can have really poor games and still deliver the goods. And I think it will be interesting. It'll depend what offers come in for him and if he indeed is happy to move to Saudi Arabia or the MLS or whoever comes in for him. So yeah, I think if I had to put my house on it right now, I'd say I think he could leave in the summer. But there are potentially a few moving parts there that it might depend on what happens with the manager and with the rest of the squad in the summer as well.
So James, obviously Arsenal haven't been particularly busy this window. Did a lot of signings in the summer. Have they got enough to get over the line? They've got a 6-point lead now. So have they got enough, or should they have done a bit more business?
I think that they have got enough. I mean, they do lose a lot with Mourinho being injured. He can obviously play as one of the 2-8s, but he's been arguably a more consistent, effective centre forward than Victor Gyökeres has. And it's pretty clear that when Arteta really wants to play it safe in games, he does have Mourinho up top because of what he can give them without the ball, as much as with it. But I think with Kai Havertz coming back and Gyökeres showing a few flashes of form, I think Havertz is the key. I think if Havertz was still out for a long time, or they had concerns about his durability in the second half of the season, to play consistently, then you'd probably think maybe they should go in and do one more. But I think because the other thing, of course, is if they'd gone late here and sort of panic bought or panic loaned, you are risking upsetting a squad that is really well balanced, is united, and is driven and determined by their goal to win trophies. And and also, I mean, Mikel Arteta's talking on Friday about how he wants increased squad sizes because he's worried that he's got to leave too many players out every week. Well, if he adds another player into that mix, and Mourinho comes back before the end of the season, as our colleagues in Spain believe he will, then you're only creating yourself more of a problem further down the line. I think if Mourinho was starting every single week and was absolutely, if this had been Gabriel or Saliba or Declan Rice or Zubamendi, one of the really key players in their team, then I think you could make a stronger case for it. But I think because Mourinho's just a bit of a level below that, I think whatever happens from here, if they don't win the league, it won't be because they missed out on signing somebody to replace Mourinho in January.
So just cover Chelsea before we wrap up. Obviously, it's impossible to predict what happens at Chelsea during any transfer window. I mean, they have been relatively quiet this time, but I think the one question that keeps getting asked is why is Cole Palmer still being linked with Man United? I mean, that isn't going to happen, is it? Surely.
Well, I think the genesis of that is that he has never quite settled in London. I don't think there's any secret of that. I think, and Rob will probably know this better than I do, but I think he goes home. Is it Wythenshawe he's from? He goes home to Manchester quite a lot, doesn't he? Yeah. And he's not. I don't think he's unhappy at Chelsea, but I don't think it's his spiritual home. Let's put it that way. But what we've never seen with Chelsea and these long contracts that they give out to players is how easy it is for a player to try and get out of it. And that would be what would have to happen. Chelsea have no interest in selling Cole Palmer. He's the poster boy for the Bowley Clearlake era. They feel he's the best player they've got in the team. He's the creative heartbeat at the side. He makes such a difference when he's there and playing. And they want him, to grow and develop into what they hope will be, become one of the best players in the world. They want that to happen at Stamford Bridge. Now, a lot of these long contracts, we've sort of been talking about why would players commit themselves to that? Well, the idea is that you grow together as a team, you sign these kids when they're 18, 19, 20, 21, and you incentivize these contracts. And, Cole Palmer was somebody who was on a very modest wage, actually, when he joined Chelsea, but his appearances and his goals and his assists triggered automatic contract renewals that bumped his money up quite heavily. So he's very well paid at Chelsea now. He's not one of the guys who's on one of those long-term contracts having to trigger that sort of further down the line. So you wouldn't have thought money would be a factor. And because of the length of the deal, I don't have it in front of me, but I think he's 31, 32, something like that. So you're talking about an awfully long contract that he would have to try and extricate himself from. And is it even possible for a player to do that? It would have to be Isak times 10. He'd have to go on strike. He'd have to refuse to train, tell the club he's never going to play for them again. And even then, they might not allow it to happen. So it's difficult to see it. But I think the route is spiritually, he probably wants to be back in Manchester.
I mean, this is one, like you said, the contract situation is so long. the fee that it would cost United would be, I'd imagine, beyond United. But I guess this would be the acid test of Chelsea's owners, whether they see themselves as a football club that wants to build a team or a corporation that just wants to profit on players and, buying for 40 million, selling for 80 million, whatever. But I guess that's impossible to predict. But Rob, do you see a scenario whereby Bruno Fernandes may leave Man United this summer and the replacement is Cole Palmer, or is it just too fanciful in terms of the fee?
I'm sure that he would certainly be on the list, and it is possible that Fernandes leaves. United are kind of saying that they've been a bit firmer this time than they were last time. Last time it was kind of, it's up to him. This time they're sort of saying we really want him to stay, but that doesn't mean that he will. They think that he's going to have a lot of offers, so it's possible that Bruno leaves at the end of the season. If that were to happen, and you were looking for someone to fill that number 10 role, Cole Palmer would have to be on that list, however fanciful it may be, because James is right. United are well informed about his situation at Chelsea. They know that he's a boyhood Man United fan. They know that he's not particularly settled in London. He does come up to Manchester a lot to see friends and family. I think James is right. I don't think that it's that he's unhappy at Chelsea. It's more just he prefers spending his time in Manchester because that's where his friends and family are. And so United are well aware of that and could sort of play on that a little bit. The problem, though, comes with his contract situation. His contract is so long, the fee that it would take would be absolutely monstrous. And if United are saying, as they are, that their main area of concern is deeper line midfielders, so a Wharton or an Elliot Anderson, if you pay £100 million for one of those players, and it's possible that the fee for Elliot Anderson may stretch to 100 million or at least between 80 and 100, have you got another 100 plus? And I'm sure it would take 100 plus to get Cole Palmer out of Chelsea. Probably not. I think United's view of it is he is someone who they would like to have at some stage, but there's no kind of timeline for it. Obviously, things would change if Palmer made it clear to Chelsea that he wanted to leave, because that would put them immediately on the back foot. And I'm sure that United would try to take advantage of that. But you're talking about a load of, how many, what have I said, if about 20 times in the last 2 minutes. So that tells you where it's at. But I'm sure United's recruitment department are looking at him as someone who could join them at some stage in the future. Whether it happens or not this summer, I'd be very, very surprised.
I guess a lot depends on if United get themselves in the Champions League and the money that brings around, and they're getting some big wage earners off the wage bill this year. But I think we all agree that it's an unlikely scenario. Is there any more points of order, points of business we should mention before we wrap up this window? Any more big deals that we think will happen in the summer? Beth, come on, Liverpool. This was big last summer.
I think that the thing is, considering Liverpool obviously spent a record-breaking amount of money last summer, 450 million, I think they're going to have another big summer again. I think there'll definitely be a lot of incomings and outgoings, because as much as Liverpool signed a few really good players last summer, and I think we're now starting to see the likes of Ekitike and Florian Wirtz that they're really starting to show their quality. I think Liverpool need at least one winger, probably two. Certainly, if Mo Salah goes, they need, again, at least one defender, maybe two, depending on what happens with Ibrahima Konate. They need probably a midfielder as well. So I think that they still probably need, 5 or 6 players in the summer, which, it's not very often you see clubs, and certainly not very often you see Liverpool have a really busy summer, and then, the next summer that they have to do the same again. So I think that the one thing to say is that Liverpool will always point out that, yes, they spent an awful lot of money last summer, but they also sold very well. And that's sort of, I guess, not necessarily what Arsenal did. I think one of the reasons Arsenal's squad is so good this season is because they brought in some real quality, but they didn't necessarily lose an awful lot of quality. So I think Liverpool feel like there's probably still room for manoeuvre in terms of financial rules and everything, because they did sell last summer, and I think they will probably have to offload a couple of big names potentially off the wage bill this summer, and Mo Salah, I'm sure, will be among them, among the ones who is tipped to go anyway.
The one we've not spoken about is one that James wrote about a week ago. Is Julian Alvarez and Arsenal's interest, because he's a player that I saw up close at City. If he joins Arsenal, that is an absolute game changer. And I know that in the piece you wrote, you said that it would take an awful lot to get him out of Atletico Madrid and the fee that would be involved. But if Arsenal were to sign him, that is an unbelievable signing in the summer. To add to what they've already got, I mean, that would put, in my mind, that would put Arsenal on a different level.
Yeah, and I think that's how they see it. They've got a problem, really, in that they signed Victor Gyökeres last summer. He could still come good, but he is fighting a mounting weight of evidence to the contrary. And what do you do with a player like that? You know, they signed him as a win now signing. They could win the title, of course. He could be the striker that, I think he's got 6 Premier League goals to his name. He is their top scorer in the Premier League, and they could win the league. So who are we to sit here and criticise Victor Gyökeres? But I think if you look at the general picture of their forward line, Gabriel Jesus will have a year left in the summer. He talked in Milan about how he'd like to sign a new contract. I'm sure he would on the money he's on. I don't think he's going to get one. So I think it may be a case that he moves on. And if he does, and if there are still question marks about Gyökeres, which I suspect there will be come the end of the season, and you've got Kai Havertz, whose injury or fitness record is now in doubt, given his troubles over the last year or so, there's an obvious hole to fill. And yeah, from what I was told, you know, Alvarez is very, very high on their list. As you say, I feel the same way about it, in that I think he ends all doubt about whether they have a top-class centre-forward to just sort of finish off that team. And he can do everything, can't he? You know, we sort of talk about Gyökeres and Jesus and Havertz and Marino, obviously, is now injured, as sort of being horses for courses, and they can fit different styles, different systems, whatever. You just think Alvarez can do it all, really. Got that pedigree at the highest level. And Andrea Berta, the sporting director, could be sort of ace in the hole for them there, because, of course, he knows he worked at Atletico for so many years. He actually did the deal that brought Alvarez to Atletico Madrid, and he remains close with the players' camp. So you kind of feel as though there are so many sort of obvious ins there for Arsenal that if they were to pursue that deal, they'd start on, you know, stage 10 rather than stage 1. And yeah, it would be a big money deal. The talk in Spain is 100 million euros plus, and that's really just to start the conversation. But from what we were told, and actually Arteta was speaking about this today, you know, there is, despite the fact that they spent £1 billion in 6 years under Arteta, and they spent a quarter of a billion in last summer on 8 new players, they are talking as though they've got cash to go again in the summer. Of course, if they win the Premier League, if they win the Champions League, they've got huge prize money coming in there. That'll only help. I think it's a deal that they would like to do. I think Arda Güler at Real Madrid is another one that they are very keen on. And this is the kind of level that they're looking at now. And this is what they feel Berta can give them. I think these players in the past, they would have been a little bit, I know they did Declan Rice, but I feel that was a little bit different because he was at West Ham. I think in the past, they'd have looked at these top young players, or Alvarez is a little bit older, but these top players at top European clubs, and maybe thought, I'm not sure whether we can necessarily get these players out. You know, you think about some of the talent that they brought in, they're not buying at the absolute peak level. You know, Odegaard obviously was somebody who came in who had a checkered reputation. You know, Saliba they brought in from France, Gabriel. They're not players they've signed from really top class. Even Zubimendi from Real Sociedad. You know, you're not talking about Europe's elite clubs that they're signing from. But I think that's what they see as Berta, somebody who can give them that. And obviously Alvarez would fall into that category.
I still think if Arsenal are in a race with Liverpool, Man City, Chelsea, they still come fourth, even if they win the league. I think they have to still convince a lot of players that they are the big club, that the big superpower that they're trying to be. I still think that the other clubs have got more appeal, but you know, we'll wait and see.
Yeah, but if they win the title, I mean, wages they can offer. They're prepared to offer top wages now. That's the other thing that Arsenal weren't always sort of willing to do. And if they are, you know, champions of England, maybe I don't think they'll win the Champions League, but if they are champions of Europe, with that squad and the talent they have and the opportunity they have to build and develop together, it's a good age, that group. They're going to stay together for a while, you'd think. It's an appealing proposition.
Fourth on my list. Anyway, it's been an active and a hectic last 40 minutes. We've talked about what's going to happen in the summer, so hopefully the summer window is going to be as entertaining as the last 40 minutes have been. So, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. See you in the summer window.